Hello guys. So I'm gonna show you guys kind of like what to look for in a stock and how to learn what to look for. This is kind of what I personally do, not on like a daily basis, but like, if I'm sitting there in class and I just happen to be reading the news, it's kind of how I interpret my news and stuff. And I'm gonna be going over like the prerequisites and stuff, not really like how you buy it, not really like all the things like, oh, the price and like the price history and things like that. I won't be going over that. I'll just be going over like the really casual stuff that like really anyone can do if they don't know what to do. This is kind of like I guess the bare minimum basics that like I guess everyone can start with. And so one thing you can look at is the news. So I'm sure we've all seen NVIDIA, AI in the news and things like that. And so this is just, example. And let's just say you had no idea what NVIDIA was, and you looked at these and you're like, huh. Well, the first thing you're gonna say is probably, wow, sounds like NVIDIA is getting really popular, right? And yeah, they are. I mean, there's a bunch of articles about them, AI everywhere, blah 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 blah, right? And so that's kind of how you want to look at like the stock. Then you can probably go look at the NVIDIA stock and be like, huh, I wonder if this is gonna go up or down based on this news. And as you can see, the news isn't really bad. It seems like it's pretty good news. And so that can kind of show us that maybe the stock will go up. And we never know the future, but the stock will probably go up. And so that's kind of something you want to look at. And Nvidia has been really successful in the past. And additional to that, Donald Trump has been elected as the next president of the United States, and that has caused things like, of course, he's gonna pick his head of departments and things like that. For example, RFK has been picked as the Health and Human Services department head, and as you can see by this title, it's you know he has very unorthodox views, according to this article, about medicine, and so basically what that means is that you can kind of think about from like the perspective of like let's say like a medicine company like Pfizer, you're making the next vaccine, and you hear that RFK is going to basically be like your overhead from the government. And of course, you kind of don't want that because as a vaccine company, you kind of want to make vaccines while RFK is probably going to like not let you. And so we can kind of predict that with the RFK election, a lot of health services will be dropping in value for those stocks and stuff. And this has happened also already. Like even though he hasn't taken any course of action, some of them have dropped like a little bit in value. And so that's kind of something you want to look at. It's just recent news. And again, Trump and his tariffs, that's another thing that's gonna affect like, production. And so as you can see by the title, he says he's gonna implement some tariffs, and that's gonna hurt a lot of companies that do foreign production. It's gonna help companies that do domestic production. And so that's kind of what you want to look at too, is that like, maybe you want to sell your stocks that are like foreign companies and produce everything foreign, import stuff. Or maybe you want to buy more stocks that are in companies that maybe like do everything domestically. So maybe like American auto manufacturers and stuff like that that keep everything in the US. That this is probably these tariffs are probably going to help them more than hurt them, which could help their valuation or like help their stock price, and will help their stock price go up. And so that's kind of what you want to look at and think about when you're looking at these news articles. Not just like oh, Trump's implementing tariffs, but more like oh, how can these tariffs affect these stocks and things like that. Another thing you can kind of look at is things called like earnings reports, which is kind of where companies go like, oh yeah, they release to the public and they're like, oh yeah, so this is how we did during this quarter of the year. And so here are a few companies, for example, that are releasing theirs on January 15th, next week. So we have JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, BlackRock, things like that. And so if you think a company did well, like if you know they did well, maybe they signed a new partnership, yada 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 yada, or maybe they had a lawsuit that can affect their earnings reports, which in turn can also affect their stock price. And usually, what happens is that like investors make like a kind of like a bet on how much the company does or how well the company does on their earnings reports. And if it's like above a certain amount, stock price is going to go up. If it's below, like if it's below as in like it's going to be unexpected, like an unexpected loss, or like not even a loss, it can be like an unexpected drop in revenue, or there's just like not enough revenue as expected. That can kind of hurt a company stock. And Not by like a ton. It's not gonna like boost it by like 50% or anything crazy. It's gonna, maybe a few points and things like that. But that's kind of something you want to look at too. Is like, if there's an earnings report coming up, you can kind of like anticipate that if you think the company's doing well. Like, if we go back to Nvidia, Nvidia's been doing pretty well, so their earnings report probably helped their stock by a bit compared to, a company that's been in a bunch of lawsuits and things like that. Although, these are kind of like really good ways to look at things, it's also important to remember that like at the end of the day, you're kind of predicting the future. And no, you're not doing any like tele telepathy or whatever, but like you're still kind of like at the end of the day, still anticipating things to happen. You never know what's gonna happen. Nvidia could shoot down to zero one day. We never know. But this is like an example of that, is that you have a bunch of dudes who are like really good at predicting all this stuff, and they predicted that the S&P 500 would be these prices. And so the S&P 500 is kind of like it's essentially like a representation of the market and how we're doing, I guess you could say, from like a really really basic standpoint. And this is kind of like a good baseline too. And so as you can see, a lot of these companies are all of these companies undershot the actual S&P 500. JP Morgan's at 4,200 and the highest Oppenheimer's at 5,200. So there's only $1,000 gap, but the actual price was 5.8. And so as you can see, a lot of things are really unexpected. And this is very good that the S&P was overperformed by expectations, because that just means we're doing a lot better than we hoped to do. And so that's just something to remember too, is that really anything can happen. All these people made these predictions, and I'm sure at the beginning of the year, a lot of people were like, "Oh, they're probably right. Let's just see, right?" And then like they hit 5.2 maybe like 3 months ago, and so people are like, "Oh, oh wow, okay," and then now it's 5.8, and so that's just something you kind of want to remember, is that really anything can happen, and luckily this time it was good, and yeah, that's kind of it. Thank you.